Hi folks, I'm Becky with Enduring Finances, and I want to welcome you to our first episode of the new podcast, Careers at a Glance. Our mission is to explore the career paths of everyday people to better understand what they do, how they got there, and what they've learned along the way. I've been asked a lot about my own experience in the military as a military policeman, so I figured the best place to start would just be kind of talking about my own experience. So here's a brief overview of who I am and how I ended up joining the military. I grew up in southern Idaho, and I spent most of my childhood roughhousing with my brothers, and we spent a lot of time camping, fishing, hiking, just being in the outdoors. And I started working pretty young, doing, the typical young girl type things, working as a babysitter. I tried to do like a weed pulling business. We sold ice cream in the park during the summers. I worked as a farmhand moving pipe and doing that type of work until I turned 15 and a half, and then I started at a small town local fast food restaurant, and I worked there the rest of the time through high school, and I absolutely loved that job. It was a great experience. When I was in high school, I was pretty active in a lot of different areas. I didn't really have a set, path that I was taking. I participated in cross country, I sang in choir, I was the drama club president, and was in musicals and straight plays, and of course I did FFA. So I ended up taking a welding class and a small engine shop class, and I really was considering becoming an underwater welder as far as a career path for me. So much so that I actually applied and was accepted to the Divers Institute of Technology in Seattle. It's a 7-month program that teaches you all the need to know about underwater welding and diving, and it costs about $30,000 to get through the school, not including rent and basic necessities and food and stuff. So my boyfriend and I at the time had planned to move to Seattle, and that was going to be essentially a career path. But because of the money issue of it in such a short period of time, I was a big reason of why I did not pursue that further. So that kind of left me with, what do I do now? I had a lot of friends that from high school in my hometown that had joined the military, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, the whole 9 yards. And I went in and I talked to a Navy recruiter because they have divers, they have Navy divers. And the recruiter was pretty honest with me, which I'm really grateful for, because it could have ended up being a really bad thing if they had potentially lied to me and tried to just get me in. And they essentially told me that because I was a female, I would likely not see any actual dive time, and I would be stuck on the surface and not doing what I actually wanted to do. To kind of expand on that, underwater welding at deep sea levels can involve living in pressurized chambers essentially for a couple weeks or a month or months at a time. It's called saturation diving, where essentially it's trying to limit the amount of time that you have to spend decompressing coming back up from such great depths, which when you dive down 200 or 600 or 1,000 feet down in the ocean, you're breathing pressurized air through your mouthpiece, and the weight of the water compresses all of those gases inside of you. And think of it like you're on an airplane and you're going up and your ears need to pop, and you yawn and then you pop, and then all that pressure just relief happens. With diving, you can't just pop to the surface and pop your eardrums and be fine. If you do that, you literally will go through excruciating pain and potentially most likely die, because you came up so fast that it just pops inside of your body, all those gases that have to get out of your body. And so typically rule of thumb is it's about a 24-hour period for each 100 feet that you go down if you stay down for an extended period of time. So if you go down 600 feet, you're looking at 6 days of decompressing essentially before you even reach the surface and can walk around. And so the idea that a female, this was 2010, would be in a pressurized chamber, potentially at the bottom of the ocean or the top side of the ocean, where you couldn't get to them for a period of days. If there was to be a sexual assault or some type of altercation, it would be really unsafe and a very high risk. And so the likelihood that they would okay me to go down there with a group of men for an extended period of time was highly unlikely. And so more than likely I wouldn't actually be doing the diving, I wouldn't be doing the demolition and the welding and all of that. It would be more of me on the top side watching everybody else do what I wanted to do. So that kind of nixed the Navy route for me. One of my best friend's dads was a National Guard recruiter, and so of course I went in and talked to him, which led me to talk to a full-time active duty Army recruiter. And because I'd taken that small engine shop class, I felt like I was pretty comfortable with my hand. I'd done a lot of repair work on my Ford Ranger, and I could see that as a potential option. And so I went in there with the idea of I'd be a wheeled vehicle mechanic or a helicopter mechanic, and went through the steps of getting the initial, okay to join the military, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting for one of these slots to open up. And the way the Army works is essentially there's only a limited number of positions available, and so you have to wait. So you have to wait until one of those opens up, and that can mean someone advances into a different job path or a different rank, or someone leaves the military entirely. And so we were just playing the waiting game. And I mean, it'd been quite a while, and one day the recruiter calls me up and he was like, hey, there's a slot for military police. And we had previously discussed, alternatives of what doesn't happen with this, where could you potentially go. And the military police corps had something that had piqued my interest. And so it'd been such a long time, and I felt like I was ready to go, and it was something that I needed to do sooner than later. And so I took that slot as military police and waited 6 months to ship out for that. So what did the military police really honestly do? There are two sides when it comes to being an MP, which is military police. One side is the garrison side, and the other is the field side. Now, the garrison side is focused on community policing, where you're acting as first responders, investigators, providing security for the installation. The second side, the field side, is more of the combat scenario tactical operations that you would see downrange in a combat environment. And I think a primary factor of determining how much time you're going to spend doing either or is based off of where you're stationed. When I was in Hawaii, there was an entire battalion of MP companies, and we would rotate the duties between us. So we would typically do like a 6-week cycle of working the road as patrol officers, or 6 weeks working on the gates, or 6 weeks going through our field training working on those tactical movements. So it just kind of depends on that. When I was in Germany, we were a single platoon, essentially operating as a detachment. We weren't anywhere close to our primary company or our battalion or anything like that. And our sole mission was to provide 24/7 community policing for the installation. And we didn't even have a motor pool. So there was literally nothing for us to do in the tactical side of that on a regular basis. And you would have had to bring in another unit to cover down on our AO, and that would have been more work than just sending that unit to fill whatever mission there might be. So the likelihood of deploying from Germany in that specific location was very, very slim. So what does a typical day look like for an MP in the Army? I would say on the road, working in the policing aspect, the DA6, which is the schedule, runs your life, and it changes every single day. Sometimes it changes multiple times a day. It's incredibly frustrating because there's so many moving pieces and so many taskings and incidents coming up that the schedule is just all over the place. You're never sure when you're going to get a day off. In Hawaii, we typically worked 8-hour shifts, and that's on the road patrolling for 8 hours. But that wasn't the only thing that we did that day. So you have to add in an hour or so for the physical training that we would conduct, and then you have to go in and draw your weapons, your ammunition, make sure you have all your equipment, actually get to the PMO, the police station per se, and go through guard mount, make sure that you're up to date on training, go through any handoffs and briefings that you need to be aware of for the shift that you're taking over, and then actually getting the patrol cars and going out and taking over the patrol. And so it took an extended period of time to actually get onto that 8-hour shift. And then, of course, once you complete the 8-hour shift, you still have to go back in and make sure that all your reports are done. You need to complete all of those. You need to turn in your patrol car, make sure that it's washed and cleaned, and Then you have to go in and turn in all your ammunition and your weapons and go through that whole process on the back end. And so that 8-hour shift was typically about a 12-hour shift, like combined, and sometimes more depending on what kind of cases and scenes that you would be responded to. I know one in particular, I was there all the way through the shift that came in and relieved us. I worked all the way through their shift on a specific case and left and had like minimal time to essentially sleep and then come back around and do it again. If you're working the gate, you can expect to check countless IDs of people coming on post for first formation and then work call and lunch, and after the workday ends, there's just a constant flow with some pretty heavy times. You might conduct vehicle searches or deal with intoxicated drivers that are trying to come back on post, or potential security risk with one of them, and you have to deal with that type of situation. If you're on patrol in a law enforcement setting, you really respond to some of like the minor aspects of what policing would be in the community. You have domestic disputes, whether they're physical or just verbal. You have loud noise complaints. You have sexual assaults, rapes, child abuses, larcenies, physical assaults, fights. You can do regular traffic stops. You do DUI checkpoints. You write tickets, parking tickets, or speeding tickets, or anything like that. And it really just kind of depends on the day-to-day aspects of what's popping. Some days it can be incredibly slow and you feel like you're just dragging through because there's nothing really substantial going on. And some shifts it's like you don't even have time to pee, you don't have time to drink, you don't have time to eat, because there's just one thing after another and you're just running, trying to make sure that you're giving all the other patrols the support that they need. If you aren't working the road and you're on platoon duty, which is like normal Army typical time frame, you're going to have your first work call at 6:30 in the morning for flag call and accountability, where usually the entire company, a battalion, a brigade, or whatnot is going to form up in big mass formations and essentially go through flag call. And then you'll do physical training, PT, until about 7:30, and then you'll be released to do hygiene, eat, change into your work uniform, and then work call is typically at 9 a.m. If it's a Monday, for the Army across the board, it is Motor Pool Monday, and you typically are going to be spending the morning and most of the afternoon in the motor pool, PMCSing your Humvees, your LMTVs, your trailers, your ASVs, any type of motorized vehicle technically that you use. And you're essentially just making sure that it works and that it runs and doing any operator level maintenance and repairs that you need to. And if you weren't at the motor pool, then you would be, at the company. We had a tack room, we had the CTA that we could work on, where essentially you're doing maybe taskings that have come down. Maybe the sergeant major needs you to do something, or you need to cut lawns, or cut grass, I should say. Or you're working on training, soldier level tasks, taking soldiers that are available and going through training and making sure that everybody is staying up and current with tactics and techniques. And I think most of the time it comes down to kind of a hurry up and wait, or you hurry to get through, or you hurry to prep and you're just sitting there waiting for an extended period of time for the orders to come down. Maybe it's even just the orders to go home. Typically, I would like to think that you would get out of there by 1700. Sometimes it was 1800 or 1900. It just kind of depends on the work that needed to be done. And then if you're in the field cycle, or the combat tactical operations cycle, which is pretty much a very go for the military police. My first unit in Hawaii, they were incredibly good about making sure that we were training as we fight. They went by the motto as peace as in war. And so we were up tempo, working very hard to make sure that we were going through realistic training scenarios so that when we did go to combat, we would be operating in the same level and there wouldn't be a gap on that. And so we would spend a lot of time going over squad maneuvers, platoon maneuvers. We did company drills. We went through an extensive amount of training on that. We focused on dismounted patrols, mounted patrols, responding to an ambush, the typical soldier tasks in a combat scenario. So what was my personal experience in the Military Police Corps? I joined the Army in 2011 and attended one station unit training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is essentially basic training and advanced individual training, or AIT, combined into one massive training that's called OSIT. And for military police at 31 Bravo, it's 20 weeks long total, plus, time and reception and all of that. And we had the same drill sergeants the entire time. So you showed up, you went through the field phase, the shark attack with those same drill sergeants, and then they worked with you the entire time through all of that training on the basic soldier level tasks of shoot, move, and communicate, into the specific MP related tasks with patrolling and search and seizures and all of that. And so you had a great rapport with them the whole time, which was really great. After graduating OSIT, I was stationed in Hawaii, and I spent time as a gunner and mostly as a driver there with a 249 Bravo. I think this phase of my military career was mostly becoming the best soldier that I could be, learning as much, soaking up as much information so that if I needed it, I had it, and I was able to respond in the best way possible. One of the initial things that you have to go through as an MP is you go through all this training, and then you get to your duty station, and then they essentially go, that wasn't good enough, we're going to put you through another training of MP related tasks with searches, DUIs, all of that. And so we went through another training before we were able to start OJTing, on the job training for actually patrolling on the road. And part of that involves you have to get tased and you have to get OC sprayed. Essentially, you got OC sprayed, and then you had to go through a small obstacle course, what we're going to call that, where you had to practice hand-to-hand techniques with a confrontational person and use your baton on someone and essentially apprehend somebody, put the handcuffs on them and control them after you'd been sprayed before you could go through decon. So it really painful. Would not recommend it. I don't ever want to get OC sprayed again, so if you ever try, probably give in to whatever you want with that. And then in spring of 2013, I was promoted to specialist, and then shortly thereafter took on my own team. And then in 2014, I actually went through the promotion board and got my promotal status to be picked up for a sergeant. And then I was later promoted to corporal right after that, which was a big achievement for me. It had been one of my goals before I joined that I wanted to reach the rank of corporal, which is the baby back of the Corps non-commissioned officers. And that was something that I wanted to reach, and so accomplishing that within my first duty station was really big for me. My initial contract for the military was 5 years on active duty service as an MP, and because I wanted to go to Germany after Hawaii, I had a couple of friends that went to Germany, I had to extend my contract out and essentially a request to have an additional overseas tour. And that got approved, and so I went to Germany in spring of 2015. And then that October, I picked up my sergeant stripes finally. So I've been promoted for over a year, and you're just waiting on points. It's based off of kind of that slot system where there's only so many slots they can take, and so they pointed off of the Army has a promotion system based off of points, and so you get certain points for what you've accomplished in your career, and they'll lower the points down to a certain level when they have so many slots, so they fill those. And so it took a year for me to pick that up, but I picked that up in Germany and was working as patrol supervisor and patrol, like just a regular patrolman during that time. And then in the spring of 2016, I kind of started to transition away from the day-to-day aspects of the military police to the operational side of the Army, and I ended up taking over the arms room. I was the arms room NCOIC, I was the barracks NCOIC, I was the alcohol and substance abuse program manager for my unit, I was the UPL, so I did all of the urinalysis or the piss tests for our platoon there, and really took on a back behind a desk type of paper pusher role. For those of you who don't know, an NCOIC is just a non-commissioned officer in charge. That's all. Army loves their acronyms. Overall, I never deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. I never saw combat. I'm lucky to have never seen combat. All in all, I was in active duty status for 5 years and 7 months, and I was discharged as a sergeant in spring of 2017. I think one of the hardest things for me in my career was when I first became a team leader. And I had what was nicknamed the ASAP team, the Army Substance Abuse Program team. 2 of my soldiers were involved in alcohol-related incidences. It was a hard time for me. I feel like I stepped into that leadership role with a lot of like self-expectations of what I wanted to be as a leader and how I wanted to lead soldiers, and I wasn't quite there yet with my ability. And I think there was a very specific turning point of where it went from bad to worse. Our company was on a dry status. We were also on a QRF status, which means we were up for essentially a rapid deployment to somewhere in case of an emergency situation. And so we had bags packed, like we were on a recall status of, I think it was 2 or 4 hours, where we had to be essentially up and moving out to go. And we weren't allowed to drink any alcohol, which is what that dry status was. And we were getting off of mid-shift, so we'd work all night. And there was 2 other NCOs and I, and there had been a situation we'd found out, and we wanted to talk to one of the soldiers who was the roommate of my soldier. And so we went up, and it was like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, and found out that both of them were intoxicated, like belligerently intoxicated. And we had to make a decision with the leadership of our platoon, what is our course of action? Because we could push paper on them, we could recommend them for Article 15, go the UCMJ route, or we could essentially take it into our own hands and sober them up and make sure that if something were to happen, we would be prepared. And we went the soldier up route, and so we put them through a grueling smoke session, and I vividly remember what we did to them. But the turning point with that was the 2 other NCOs were very vocal, very good at, in the moment they needed to flip that switch and go in. And I wasn't comfortable with that. And one of them turned to me in the middle of this going on, and they said, Holyoke, you need to yell. Like, you need to participate in this or they will not respect you. And I was like, okay, like, we have to do this, like, I have to go there. And I went there, and I wish I wouldn't have gone there because I wasn't ready. And I went from, essentially I took my ability as a leader to empathize and sympathize and really like personalize with the soldier and what they needed. And we took that all away on my development of that. And we went from, okay, here I am, we're going to go 0 to 100, and there was no in between. It was either like, we're okay, or we're really not okay, and I'm going to get in your face, I'm going to yell at you, and I'm going to have anger issues. And I regret that because it took me a while to kind of move past that aspect, and I did not treat those initial soldiers that I had the way that I wanted to. And I couldn't. And I regret that. And so I think that was really hard for me to know that I wasn't where I wanted to be as a leader, and I was struggling to fill that gap. I think after a while I kind of, figured it out. I had a lot of help with leadership talking to me and coaching me and guiding me on developing my leadership skills to the point where I felt like I finally hit my groove before I left Hawaii. And so when I picked up my promoval status, I was, turned into corporal, and it kind of was like a change of pace for me, and to be able to morph my leadership style into what it needed to be for the soldiers that I had. I think a lot of times people ask about your military experience. They ask, have you ever been shot at? Have you killed somebody? Have you ever deployed? Have you ever seen combat? Those are pretty typical questions that I've been asked a lot. Another thing that people like to ask are, what are your funny stories, and, what are some of the worst experiences you've had with calls? And so I think we'll start with the worst, and we'll just knock that out, and then we'll move to some of the funnier ones. I think one of the worst scenes that has kind of stayed with me that I'm comfortable talking about was a sexual assault that happened. The call came through, and it was literally like in progress, like it's happening right now, we need to go. And another patrol and I got on scene at the same time, and it was on a cul-de-sac, so a circle of houses on a military installation. They literally look the exact same, and these were like almost like apartment buildings, and so there was multiple stories, and they all looked identical. And we got there and we were sprinting through this cul-de-sac and could not find the right building. And eventually we figured out the issue, we got there, and everybody else responded, and by that time the suspect had already left and the victim, it had already happened. And that's something that I've replayed a lot of, what if we would have gotten there before and were, able to stop it. And other aspects of that I won't go into, but that is one of those that I have replayed a lot of, what ifs and what could have done in that situation. I think one of the funniest calls that I ever had wasn't actually on patrol, I was actually on the gate, and it's funny because I'm already thinking of it and chuckling. At the time it was not funny. At the time I was so mad. I was so mad. I was on the gate. I think it was lunchtime, and so the person that I was with was eating, and so they weren't there at the gate. I was by myself, and a lot of cars were coming in. And this was in Hawaii, by the way. And in Hawaii, a lot of people go to the beach and they come back, in your swimsuit, you don't really care about clothing, but post policy was, in order for you to come on post, you had to have a shirt on. And this couple, a Navy couple, guy and a girl, were coming through, and he did not have a shirt on. And so, I've got his IDs and I'm checking on him. I'm like, oh, sir, can you please, put a shirt on? And that was like the end of the reasonable conversation we had, because they lost their minds. Were yelling, screaming, throwing a tantrum about this, freaking out. And so they're blocking traffic coming on post. I'm trying to use my communication skills to be like, just put on your shirt and you go on post and take it off. I don't really care. You just have to have it on right now. And got them to pull over. There's a little pull off right at the gate so that I could continue to let cars on post, because there's literally a line that's just going out, and I'm the only one there. And so I'm thinking they'll pull over, get the shirt out of the back or whatnot, put it on, and give them their IDs, and they go on their way. That's not what happened. So they pull over, the chick's still in the car, the van, and she's yelling, the windows are down, she's blah, 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 blah. And the sailor gets out, and I thought he was going to put a shirt on, but I look over and he's come to the back of the van, so he's directly across the lane, the traffic lane, and he's wearing shorts. And he takes the shorts off and he puts it on over his head. And so he's wearing a shirt, and he doesn't have any pants on, so he's just running around in his chonies, his underwear. And I'm like, oh, come on. I can't leave the gate. It's my primary duty is to make sure that it's secure and that no one that's not supposed to come on post comes on. And if I were to go and potentially address him, people could come on. So it's what do I do? So I'm trying to call, I have a radio, I'm trying to make contact with a patrol or one of the supervisors that can come and assist me, and it was just not happening. We weren't connecting on that, and so I'm alone. And finally, everybody can see what's going on. Everybody can see this half-naked man going like this with shorts on his head. Get them to get back in their vehicle, and then they pull to the opposite side, so there's an outgoing lane, and now they're sitting there yelling at me. I've still got their ID cards, trying to get cars on post. I am pissed. I'm red in the face. I'm just fuming. They're acting like they're 5, and I really just want to go spank them. And eventually, came to a head. I yelled at them to get off the post. I threw their ID cards back in there, and they drove away. And yeah, I look at that and I'm like, what? You're a grown adult. What are you doing? Just put a shirt on and drive off. Don't make it harder than it has to be. I think if there had been another patrol that had come, or I wasn't alone, it would have ended very differently. I probably would have apprehended and potentially used OC spray in that scenario, because it was just so aggravating. And I think they would have been turned over to their unit, and their commanding officer could have dealt with that, because it was not fun, but it's funny now. Yeah. I think one of my most boring calls was someone cut a fence onto the post, essentially cut through a chain link fence, and it was considered an active crime scene. It was not secure, and so anybody could have come in through that hole. And so while they were waiting for the repair person and they were doing all their things, they needed a patrol to be posted up on this hole. And I spent almost an entire 8-hour shift staring at a hole in a fence all day. Some of my most intense calls were one in particular. There was an active shooter that was called. We were just getting off of shift, like right in the transition period, and so it's a little bit chaotic with moving pieces and trying to get everything up and going. And I was coming back, the patrol supervisor was coming back, and the call came up, there was an active shooter at the commissary, and that essentially means like you go in and you eliminate the threat, like you go, like that's it. And so we ran to the patrol car, and I mean we're hauling butt to get there, and in that moment it's like, oh crap, like it's about to go down, like this is it, like let's go. Wrong post, it wasn't us, it wasn't even an active shooter, it was someone with a firearm on a different Navy post on the island. It turned into be nothing, but in those moments of getting there, you're thinking like, okay, this, like I could potentially take someone's life today, or I could potentially die today. Another one that I think is funny now, that was intense in the moment, was in Germany. We had an airfield, and typically there weren't a lot of operations going on in the field. It was kind of transitioning what it was like fulfilling for the Army. And it was nighttime, it was dark, and we were out there. It was 2 other patrols and I think I was patrol soup out there, and there was an aircraft that flew over the airfield, and then we started to see parachutes open up. And mind you, typically if they're doing something like that, they're going to let the PM know, the PMO of the police station know that there's going to be a training exercise and they're going to be doing this. And we hadn't been briefed on anything, and so we call up the dispatch on our radios, and we're like, hey, you know, is there something that we didn't get briefed on? And they're like, no, there's nothing in the books. Like, there's nothing in the books for anybody doing this. Like, they're not us. And so at that time there'd been a lot of terrorist activities inside of Europe, and I can't remember if it was before or after there was the explosion in the city near us, so I cannot remember that. But so there was tension. There was tension of potential threats, and so it was like, oh crap! Like, people are coming down. They're parachuting down into an airfield on a military installation. We don't know who they are. We can't identify them. Like, we need to set up. And so one of us broke this way, one of us was going around the airfield to come in from the side and kind of flank the scenario. We had our M4s, we were ready to go. And so we're like, whew, okay, let's do this. Like, yeah, like, let's do this. And we're like busting through, like driving through the airfield, and they come back over the radio and like, they got a hold of the unit, they're doing a training scenario, they didn't tell us. And so it ended up being American soldiers doing this scenario. But whew, I tell you, the pucker factor was real on that, because I thought it was a whole lot more than just what it was. And then I think a patrol, you can go from hot to cold really fast. And I think one of the great examples that I have of that was, another patrol and I, there had been these younger kids that had been shoplifting from the shopette, which is like essentially like a gas station. And they'd been coming in the pack and creating a scene, and then one of them would steal candy and other goodies, and then they'd run out of the store. And so he and I were hiding in the walk-in freezer, and we'd been interacting with them, and you know, we'd caught them once and bought them candy, and we were trying to community policing, and we were in that scenario. So we're in the freezer, we're watching, like waiting for this to happen, and a call came through, like just a little bit away, that there was an individual brandishing a shotgun in a like family environment. There were kids, there was like families, it was, you know, it was not good. And so we ended up like, we're like, oh crap, like we need, you know, we gotta go. And so we ended up running out of the freezer and jumping in patrol cars and just taking off. And we got there, and it's awkward on a military post because it was like, there wasn't like a direct street to get to there, so we had to run through. And so we ended up jumping out of patrol cars, and we locked and loaded, and we're running with our pistols. And you know, you turn the corner and I just see kids and families, and then you're trying to identify, okay, we had a description of what the individual looked like, and we just came in like guns drawn, ready to essentially do whatever we need to do in that scenario. So you can really go from hot to cold quickly. A lot of times in the military, you will work with either different branches of the military or different countries' militaries. So when we were in Germany, of course, we had a little bit of interaction with the German forces. We did a training exercise with the Macedonian forces. And then when I went through WLC or BLC, what it's called now, it's essentially a leadership course, we actually partnered with the Ghana military and brought in some of their senior leadership, like a E7, a Sergeant First Class kind of level, and they came in and went through it with us so that we could essentially learn from each other and help develop our leadership trainings for both militaries. And I ended up working very closely with one of their, like, version of the Navy through that entire thing, and that was a unique experience because we were all like gleaning knowledge from each other and putting it to good use and making sure that everybody was gaining from it. And so I really fondly remember that experience. I think no matter what, you're always going to be, no matter what career path you're in, I think you're always going to experience good leaders and bad leaders. And I think that's the same for the military. There's definitely, I've had a rare few leaders that were over me that I did not agree with them. One in particular, I was so frustrated with the training situation that we were going through. They were essentially teaching a deadly tactic in a fatal funnel, which is essentially going through a doorway, a hallway, or place where you're stuck. You're in the open, and the only way to go through is just to go through, and it's a fatal funnel. And they were teaching a very bad technique with it to soldiers that didn't, they're new. They're still learning. They're in that beginning development phase, and I was so mad. That's not the only thing, but multiple repeated instances where it felt like they were not exactly competent in their job and were teaching and leading in a way that I would not want to follow or train my soldiers in. But I'd say that's rarer than the majority of the time. I've had some amazing leaders, ones that I'm able to still be in contact with today. One of them even lives in my parents' neighborhood now. They moved to Idaho. That really shaped who I was as a soldier and how I viewed and how I carried myself. In the MP Corps, it's a very much, you're a professional. You carry yourself as a professional. You're the tip of the spear. You're the example for the military. You're setting the standards. And so it's a very much like dress, right time, right place, right uniform, best professional aspect that you have. And they instilled that in me, helped me develop into a soldier that I wanted to be and into the leader that I wanted to be. Would I change anything about my career in the military? I would say yes, I would change some things. When I was especially when I was a private and I was young, I was very much like, I want to get school done, and I was doing tuition assistance, and I was taking 1 or 2 or 3 classes at a time while working the road, and it was a lot. I was stretched really thin, and like some days we'd be in the van heading off to shift, and I would be in my textbook studying instead of interacting with people. And I think I missed out on a lot of opportunities to further deepen and develop those relationships with them, and I regret that. I wish I would have kind of slowed down and given myself the time to really experience what was going on. One of the biggest things that I've learned and I've taken and tried to apply to my personal life outside of the Army is saying yes. Someone's going to come up and say, do you want to do this? Or I need someone to do this. Like, can you do this? Will you be willing to take on this additional tasking? Say yes. Like, unless you absolutely cannot do it, say yes. Even though it's going to push you outside your comfort zone, it is going to develop you further and continue to push you forward in life. And that applies to not just the military, but civilian life. Like, that's the reason I got a job for my internship. Because at the end of it, they said, hey, we need somebody to stay on for, we need somebody to cover this gap for a period of time. Like, it's not a permanent job, but would you be willing to do it? Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then at the end of that, they're like, hey, we want to bring you on part-time. You willing to do that? Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, we need somebody to stay full-time. I can do that too. And so if you say yes and you build that you're willing to work hard, great way to do it. I think on the flip side of that, making sure that you're not being taken advantage of and knowing like your personal boundaries is really important, and it's hard to understand, like it's hard to live up to that. But I think if you say yes within your boundaries and you understand that you're not being taken advantage of, you're not allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, because that can happen in the military, like, typically, and in civilian life. If you do really good work, you tend to have more work than those that don't do very well at their work. So just be cognizant of that. But I think overall, military experience was great. The advice that I would give to somebody is go for it. If you are considering joining the military, whatever branch, whatever career path, whatever MOS, whatnot, do it. Like, it has been a great experience for me. I don't look back on it and regret it. I think it made me who I am right now. I think there's pros and cons. I think there's some negative impacts that it's had, but I think overall it's had a really positive impact on my life. And the relationships and the friendships that I've developed are something that I would never go back with. I would never walk away from. I would say if you do it, like, go all in. Like, give it the best that you can every single time. Like, max out your PT. Get your highest testing scores that you can. Like, study. Be the tip of the spear. Be the best version of what a soldier is, and you will do amazing. Like, amazing.